So I'd like to talk about race in light of what's happening in Ferguson. And the first thing I want to talk about is actually not something that's malicious, but has a huge effect on people who are minorities and on women even. And so it's from a book that I read called Whispering Vivaldi. And basically it's about stereotype threat. And what that means is that when a person is in a situation where there is the potential that they will fulfill a negative stereotype about their group, they are much more likely to perform very poorly. So this is most, able to be studied in an academic sense. And there's so many. If you read the book, there's so many examples. The studies are just conclusive. It's just one after another after another. And I'll start with one where white males actually perform worse. So they'll do a study where they'll do certain physical activities, and so they'll tell one group, like, this is a physical fitness aptitude test, and they'll tell the other group, we're just doing a study, we're just trying to determine, just something that sounds more benign, that's not as like, okay, this is an aptitude test, we're trying to see if you're good at sports or not. So the white males, when they're told it is an aptitude test, they will do worse. And so you can imagine how this affects people who are, for instance, there was another one where they had female Asian students, and they gave them a difficult math test. And before the test, they gave them a questionnaire. And if the questionnaire focused on their gender, they were more likely to do poorly than if, and it's just like, it's such a huge amount of difference that it's hard to deny. So if they were reminded of their ethnicity, say by asking, like, where the family, what's the country of origin of the family and things like that. So if they were reminded of that, then they would do fine. They would do better than a regular person would do on the test. And so, and it's something that people have to deal with that is really a part of daily life for people who are minorities. And what the title refers to, Whispering Vivaldi, is a black guy who lived in New York, or lives in New York, and he would sometimes be walking through a white neighborhood and people would be scared of him. So what he started to do was he would whistle Vivaldi songs, and that kind of just quenched the racial fear that was present, because, okay, this is a guy who likes classical music, so he's probably like, oh, this is cool. So, and there's ways to combat stereotype threat, but it is serious. It's a serious issue. If you read that book, I think it's a great book. So I recommend it, Whistling Vivaldi. So that's something that is relatively benign. It has a huge effect on academic performance, on what school you get into, what grades you get once you get there. Really has a big effect on how well you do in college. So when we're talking about affirmative action, things like that, that needs to be taken into account. And they've done studies, the difference between conservative and liberal brains, and that's really kind of controversial. But one thing they definitely come to the conclusion is that conservatives like things to be black and white, set in stone, settled, not ambiguous, not with nuance or something like that. So when you try to introduce those types of things, that makes things infinitely more complicated. And that is hard for a lot of conservatives to come to grips with. Okay, so there's that. And then there's malicious, intentional, or unintentional racism. Um, so America has never come to grips with its own racism. African Americans have fought hard for a lot of rights, for the right to just, not be enslaved, to the right to vote and to live like a normal person, according to the law at least, supposedly. And, all of those victories have been hard fought. There's been a lot of setbacks, and there's still so much institutional racism, which if you aren't aware of it, you're not paying attention. You don't care about that issue. So, you can speak about, oh, there's no racism, but are you looking into it? Are you trying to find the truth of that? Like with the justice system? Rand Paul, freaking libertarian, conservative libertarian, he did an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, I think it was, or the New York Times, and it was about talking about racial disparities in the justice system. If Rand Paul can see it, then I think you can. So America has never had a moment where it said, okay, this is our race problem and this is how we're going to deal with it, not just on a institutional level, but on a societal level, as a people. We still have people that have grown up in a really segregated and racist society, what have we done to like try to get over that? I don't think we've done very much at all. And I mean, I saw this poll. I think it wasn't too long ago, and they were asking questions about interracial marriage, and there was a big percentage of people like in the South, like Republicans, who are against interracial marriage, and they're not just against it. They want it to be illegal. So this is still like this is like it's more than 20%. I can't remember exactly the numbers, but it was a lot, and that's just shocking. And so those people are still there, and they say, oh, we elected a black president, so I mean, racism's over. What the hell more do you want? But the fact of the matter is that no, America didn't elect a black president. Half of America elected a black president. And that does not mean that if you didn't vote for him that you're racist. What it means is that maybe in like some way half of Americans have shown that they're not racist or they're not as racist, but half of Americans haven't done anything to show that. How do we even I mean, what do we know what they're talking about? And I found out the other day, I was shocked to find this out. Ronald Reagan, when he announced his campaign for the presidency, he chose to do so in a little town called Philadelphia, Mississippi, and it just so happens to be famous because it is where three civil rights workers who came down in that area from the north were murdered there. And his speech was about states' rights, which, if you know anything about American politics, is a code word for okay, the federal government shouldn't tell you whether you should keep slaves, whether you should have Jim Crow laws, whether you should have things segregated. So basically, what he was saying, hey guys, don't worry, I'm racist like you can vote for me. And Pat Buchanan, who worked for a lot of Republican presidents, has admitted this, apologized for this, called the Southern Strategy. And basically, Johnson was a Democrat. He signed the Voting Rights Act. And so the Republicans said, okay, we are going to be the party of racism so that we can get the Southern vote, which they hadn't had up until that point, usually. And so they were able to secure that, and that was a strategy that at least went through Reagan. I mean, if you're being really generous, it went through Reagan. So, I mean, I don't know when this has supposedly happened where we were like, okay, as a society, we're going to get over race. It's not going to affect you anymore. You're not going to have to deal with it with people. You're not going to have to deal with it with authority, like in school or with the police or with government. I don't know I feel like there were some things, like, yeah, black people can vote now, but we have them, we have southern states and other states, not just like Wisconsin, where what they're doing is they're trying to curtail voting in minority communities by cutting back the hours, by not doing early voting, by making it more difficult for minorities to vote, and not just minorities, but people who live in those communities. And I mean, this is if you there are conservatives that admit we don't want more people to vote. When more people vote, we lose. So they're doing it with it. That's a political strategy, which is to get fewer people to vote, and to do that not just but to do, I mean, with laws, with like saying, okay, used to be that there were 2 weeks of early voting, now there's 2 days of early voting, so things like that. So it's by no means guaranteed that a person is going to have the ability to vote or have it be easy and not going to have to stay in line for 8 hours in order to vote. So do we really all have the right to vote? I think it's a little, it's up in the air. So, I mean, if you really are dedicated 100%, you're going to be able to vote. But if you're not, if you just, a regular person want to have a regular intensity of whether you want to vote, it's going to be a lot harder for you if you're a minority or you live in a poor community that votes typically Democratic. So there's that. And I want to talk about myself. Okay. I was raised, my dad had, yeah, we had a Confederate flag hanging in our hallway. My parents were divorced. My mom, she did her best to try to have me have interracial friends. Like, she really went out of her way. But I remember there was a black family that we were friends with, and I feel like I really treated them badly. And I feel bad for that because they had to deal with that their whole lives from people like me. And, I'm not as racist as I was when I was 18. I didn't think racism was a thing anymore. I was Republican, and racism's over. Guys, stop complaining. But I still think that I do, depending on the context, I treat people differently, depending on their race. And You know, I make conscious attempts to not do that, but I feel like that's also can be annoying because I know because I wear hijab, you just want to be treated like everyone else. And when people go out of their way, or you can tell they're like it's just under the surface that they're thinking about the fact that you're a Muslim, it's annoying. You just want to be like everybody else. And I can take my scarf off and then I'm, anonymous. But you can't, you know, you can be a middle class African American. You're still an African American, and that's just the fact of the matter. And you're gonna have to deal with police harassment in your life. You're gonna have to deal with things that other people, even poor white people, are just not gonna have to deal with. And I mean, I hate pissing contests over who has it worse, but we do need to acknowledge different problems that different communities have. And just saying, oh, you guys keep playing the race card, you just think you're always the victim, and blah, blah, blah. That is just so ignorant because I mean, tell me how we got over racism. Tell me how we did it. What did we do to get over it? And show me the proof that it's over. So, but this goes to show I have racism. I treat people differently. I should not be a police officer in a minority community. You know, affirmative action is so controversial because people say, oh, we have to give the job to the person who deserves it the most or the person who's the best for the job. I think both of those questions are very complicated, but I think race is an important factor because, I mean, if you have a school district, let's say, where maybe 80%, 90% of the kids are black or Hispanic, and then you have a white superintendent, he might be a great guy with great education, great experiences like that. I don't think he's the best person for the job. And that's just one area of life. You have police officers who are policing who may not be aware of their own biases, and if they are, they don't think that they're really affecting the way that they use their force, deadly force, and just any force at all. And but if you have minorities, there's going to be more of an understanding of just on a personal level. When you meet a person, it's easier for people to understand people who come from the same backgrounds that they have. So I think it's very important that all kinds of authority positions are inclusive and representative of the communities because it's almost impossible for a white person to represent a minority person in the same way and as well as uh, a minority in that position of authority would be able to do. And that's nothing against white people. It's not to say because there's racism, it's not necessarily an accusation, against somebody, against any specific person, or even as, you know, I think things are different in different places, but we still have people that grew up in the 50s, the 60s, in the South. When did those people change? I mean, I find it hard to believe that most of them did. And I think that's going to take some time. And I don't think kids that are being raised today are even, we still live in a racist society. I don't think that my son, when he goes to school, he's gonna. I mean, I understand like wanting to appreciate Confederate history or whatever. I guess I understand that, but when he's got a list of okay, like great Americans that you can do a report on one of them, and Robert Lee is on there, or I'm just like, it makes me uncomfortable. And they like, there's no black kids in my son's school. I'm pretty sure there might be a couple, but we live in a place where it's just like in our whole state, there's not very many African Americans, but they did this project in social studies where they were all different people in the South and they had like overseers. I don't know if they had slaves. I don't think they did. But that was a character you could be, was an overseer. I mean, so our kids are still growing up in this. We haven't fixed anything. So, you know, this is something that okay, we fix it or we try our best, we do our best in the education in the beginning of life to have people have a better understanding for diversity and a better understanding of the historic problems that different communities have had, and then maybe in a generation or two we'll have it solved. It's not as easy as it seems. It's a very complicated question, and it's really, really dumb to be saying, "Don't play the race card, man. Why do you gotta bring race into it?" That is stupid. You're not educated. I don't have the time to educate you. They've done the studies that show if you have a wrong opinion and then they show you facts to dispel your wrong opinion, you're more likely to stick to it tenaciously than if you are not shown those facts. So I'm not going to have a conversation with somebody trying to explain to them racism or show them, because it's not possible. People have to figure that out on their own, or they have to be educated from a young age, or it's like, there's no point. You gotta figure things out for yourself, and people don't, and that's the problem. And then they come in with their opinions on this, which are very ignorant and dumb. Anyway, I wish I could be in Ferguson. I would love to be there. I love to protest, and I feel like this is something that needed to happen. Maybe it wasn't the best case, but we had Eric Garner who died in New York with a chokehold. I heard there was a protest recently. I really think that things should come to a head, because that's the only way we're going to fix things. And so I'd love to be in Ferguson, but in heart and mind, I'm there. And thank you.